little unique that you're coming at it in a lot of ways from a scientist's point of view and scientist's mindset.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, well, for a certain portion of my period of my career, especially when I was more active as a researcher, I still believed in an objective real world, right? I was just interested in how communication helps us understand that and make sense of it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So next standard question is, what does leadership mean to you? Big question.
So I think two things. First of all, leadership is just about stepping up to make something happen. I mean, it's not about an org chart or necessarily even being in a position of authority, although those two things very often overlap. And, you know, there's a lot made of the difference between managing and leadership. And I think that's true. But for me, it's, are you willing to step up to face the situation, say, hey, I think we can go this direction, and I'm going to help you get there. And then are you willing to keep learning as you do that? So that's the first piece, right? Step up, make things happen, learn while you do it. And then probably more importantly, bring others with you, right? And that means empower them. Never forget, in an ethics class, had a Navy pilot, Marine pilot, who led squadrons, would fly from Kuwait to Baghdad and back. And remember him talking about his number one ethical obligation was to teach his squadron how to do everything he could do as their leader, because he assumed that he could get killed on a mission. And if he did, and they didn't know how to do it, they were all in danger. Now that's an extreme example, but I think that applies. Right? I got to share everything I know so that any one of you can step up and do this in a formal structure or not. So I think that's the thing. Do I have the willingness to see it and say, okay, yep, I'm going to do something about this?
Mm-hmm. That's great. What do you suspect or know bothers people about you as a leader? Or
well, you cut out a second, Emil. Yeah.
The last part is, or what is your leadership weakness?
Yeah, the weakness question. Well, you might have already gotten a little bit of evidence of it. Probably a tendency to overthink. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I'm a researcher and I'm an academic, right? I've been in a lot of leadership positions, but okay, it's like, yeah, we get it, we understand. Can we, the doers can kind of sometimes get impatient. Okay, do we need to think about every possible angle and see everything? It's like, right. I mean, because I enjoy that part of it a lot. And sometimes that will translate as like, okay, you're not really thinking about all the details, or we're figuring out those. So a lot of the administrative aspects of things, I think, have always been an interesting challenge, because I'm the one to get out in front and to get things going and to keep people moving. But sometimes the way I'll say it is like, I love a blank sheet of paper and I've learned to use Excel. I think maybe that summarizes it.
Okay.
And have a lot of respect for the people who can use Excel, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, let's get into it. What is psychological safety?
I think there are two parts of it. At the end of the day, psychological safety is the ability to feel, well, basically that I can speak up, right? That I can try things out. I can be present in the moment. You can think of that in kind of 4 different levels. There's different models of this, but the one that I find to be the most useful really talks about 4 different levels. One is that I feel included, right? I feel like I belong. And that's a huge thing, right? That people have my back, especially my leaders, right? Whoever's in charge, but they've got my back. The second thing is that I can learn something, right? I can make a mistake. You know, there's a lot of talk about don't be afraid of failure. Well, of course you're afraid of failure. I mean, there's nothing easy about that. But do I understand that if I do, it's going to be okay? Someone's going to help me learn from it. So I'm part of a group. I have people who have my back. I know that I can learn things. I can make mistakes. And that as long as I'm learning, making new mistakes, say, that that's okay, right? That's, in fact, not only is it okay, that's part of it. That's a sign of doing what I'm supposed to be doing. A third level is, given that, then, okay, I feel like I can take action, right? I can contribute something. Not only am I learning, but now I'm actually stepping up and I can work independently, which means it's okay for me to be accountable, right? It's like, I'm looking for feedback now. And then I think the last level, if you can think of this as a progression, the last level of this is I can call things out when I think something's not working, right? Which is to say, I can innovate, right? Because innovation by its definition is against the status quo, right? That's why we do that.
Right.
So if I don't feel like I can do that, that can be a problem. But it really just start with, I can open my mouth and I'm not going to be embarrassed or shamed or feel like somehow I'm not part of it.
Yeah, there's two things that kind of resonate with me there. One is you say making new mistakes. I think that's kind of the important point there, that they need to be new mistakes. Hopefully you don't
Mhm.
repeat those mistakes, but
Mhm.
we need to, like you say, it's not easy, it's not fun, but be okay with mistakes and understand them, that it's a learning experience, which leads me to the second point that resonates with me, is that innovation. As you know, we're on a mission with learning and development to really help the University of Texas become a learning organization for all working professionals.
Right.
And in order to be, it's important because in order to be innovative, in order to say what starts here changes the world, we have to be learning. You have to
Right.
always be learning. And that requires a fair amount of vulnerability as well. It
Absolutely.
also requires environment where you are promoting and fostering psychological safety. So I think that's um, one of the reasons why this is such an important topic to me, because it's so fundamental to what we're trying to do at UT Learning and Development.
No, I totally agree. And I would say, Emil, on the point about learning, the whole education, knowledge creation enterprise, we can focus on the generation and production and dissemination of information and knowledge, right?
Mhm.
And we can confuse that with learning, right? Taking that in isn't the only part of the learning. The real part of the learning is I'm trying different and new things. And by definition, things aren't working. And then I'm adapting. That's where the
Right,
learning really is. So you
right,
need both, but that's
right.
the hard part. So yeah,
It's learning as a higher level. It's application and, yeah, understanding
yeah,
what your knowledge actually gets applied to the real world.
right.
They're interested in the concept of psychological safety. Sorry,
But
I think I froze again. I'll repeat the question. How did you first get interested in the concept of psychological safety?
well, honestly, I didn't know this is what it was at the time, but as a teacher and as a dad, quite frankly, I mean, realizing, especially with kids, and this is my own experience, it applies whether or not you have children, but this is where I've learned, I mean, but for my students as well. And then that expanded to anybody I'm working with as a consultant, but really go back to my definition of leadership. I need to help bring them along, right? So like for my students, I want them more than anything to come out of my class feeling confident, to feel like they have opportunities, right? I need to foster that. I'm teaching them things, but I want them to be able to take chances in their education, to try out new things, right? All those things. So how do I foster that? And then as a consultant, as a teacher, now more, it's now let's get formalized. Let's understand the psychology behind it. Let's understand the sociology behind it. Let's dig into why this is the case. I think a lot of it was intuitive at first. And then with a background in rhetoric, it's all about understanding moments and the implications of that. So, but I think I got interested because I'm very much on the side as I started. This is about people, right? And how people do things. People when they're rational, people when they're scared, people when they're tired, people in the moment under pressure. That's the, if you will, that can be the weakest link. We can set up all the plans we want, but if people can't do it for whatever reason, too scared, then, and that's the part that I felt like I could control. I can try to create either myself or help others do that well. But that still is kind of the fundamental insight for me. This is about how
Okay.
people approach things and how they feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good segue into the next question. One of the things that we're really being intentional about with these learning opportunities, professional development, is that we want to be accessible to again, all working professionals. And when we say that, often when we talk about learning opportunities or professional development, we're not reaching the front line, right? We're
Right.
not
Right.
reaching people in the warehouse or custodial services. And I think that it's really important when we talk about psychological safety that this is something that needs to exist in a lot of different environments. So how do we do that? How do we reach those different environments and help them understand the importance of psychological safety?
Okay, so this we were talking about this, right? This is where there's much more room to dig in on this, but let me kind of talk at two levels to kind of answer that. First of all, absolutely, right? I mean, I think you have to look at this from the context of a group of people trying to accomplish something together, not just in the context of org charts or hierarchies or who's in charge or all of the different ways we do that, right? This just comes down to you got people figuring something out. So here's an example. And this was actually over in Bass Concert Hall. I remember watching years ago, watching some three guys figure out how to change light bulbs, right? And they're high, right? How do you get up there and actually change them? And I was watching kind of the thought process, right? And you could tell it was very interesting, right? And then I think the supervisor came over. You could just watch the change in the body language. And it looked like what happened said, okay, try this. They knew it wasn't going to work. They went back and they figured it out, right?
Mhm.
And I think that type of an exchange happens all over the place. I don't care what we're talking about. So one, it's very, very important. Two, it's having open channels of communication, right? Everybody has in the organization has some sense of what the entire organization is doing. And one of my favorite examples of that, Stanley McChrystal, the General McChrystal, who was in charge of Iraq and Afghanistan, wrote a book called Team of Teams, and wonderful book on leadership. But the example that really sticks with me is that by the time he was done, he had weekly video conferences that anybody in his entire command could join, right? 7,500 people could be on these things. Didn't matter what they were doing. At the top, they were the special ops, they were driving trucks. It didn't matter. Everybody saw the whole picture. Now think about what that does, right? That's about transparency. That's about you are valued enough in this organization that you deserve to know everything that's going on. Doesn't mean you're going to impact it, but you need to know it, number one. And then number two, he set up a system where his people that he was in command of could act without necessarily getting permission first. And he told them he would have their back, whatever that was. So there was accountability. Come back to don't make the same mistakes, but that sense of we don't have to hold all of our information tightly as leaders, especially. In fact, we might get help if we put it out there, and we will very likely get help from the people who are on the front lines who probably have a ton of ideas, but nobody's ever asked them. So, well, what do you think we should do? So that's one broad level. Then it's just at the everyday level, right? Just how you talk to people. And being careful with your word choice, being careful with not being rude, right? Being careful. Like one of the things that I've asked and I've observed, like my rule of thumb is like, would you talk to your kids that way? Would you talk to your wife or your significant other that way? Would you talk to a stranger that way? So just kind of basic rules of politeness and being nice and being attentive and careful and caring, all of those. Because again, going back to the fact that this is all done by people, we're all very finely tuned to pay attention to that. Even in these kind of media like what we're doing now,
Yeah.
right? And one of the challenges of electronic communication, as we have our phones, you can get away with a lot of stuff if it's text or if it's an email or it's not face-to-face, right? And I think that's especially where you have to be careful. Like, so we know, for example, don't write emails all in caps or text messages because you're yelling at somebody. Well, yeah, you're yelling at somebody, right? So it's at both levels. There's structural things, setting up channels for communication, encouraging people to do that. But then it's just, smile, acknowledge, right? Like don't, and again, I know a lot of this from my kids because my kids will comment on it. Dad, you're not paying attention to me. So, but it's that same, and I mention those things because I think we all know how to do it. But we probably, we segment our lives out.
I think on some level that's true, but I will say that psychological safety is not always easy, right? I think case in point, right now, obviously during the crisis, the pandemic, that is for one thing difficult, to provide a psychologically safe environment. But now the ramifications of the crisis as well. People are being furloughed or voluntarily furloughed, and in other organizations they're being involuntarily furloughed and laid off.
Right.
And so how do leaders deal with that? That's tough to provide a psychologically safe workplace when, for all intents and purposes, it's not safe.
Well, what's not safe is maybe the status of a job, right? I mean, but what can always be safe is knowing that even if this person who's in charge has to let me go, they respect me and they respect my dignity enough, one, to be straight with me. So don't BS me, right? Tell me what you can tell me. So at least I know that. And then do everything you can do to help me figure out what the next thing's going to be, right? So yeah, everything, right, is, but that doesn't mean that we can't, and including where you don't know, like we're not sure. I think it's okay for leaders to say, we're not sure, but here's what we do know. I'm going to keep you in the loop. I'm going to keep you, like President Fenvez's messages, right? The continual messages and the updates. And I think about when the word went out about his wife and then his exposure to COVID-19. That was hugely important because a lot of other organizations would have tried to hide that potentially. So we don't want to upset people. We don't want to create, what creates uncertainty is when people know something is going on and nobody will tell them, especially as it directly pertains to their lives and their livelihood. So yeah, I mean, the circumstances can be unsafe, and they are. They're very, very uncertain. But even if somebody is telling me, sorry, we have to furlough you or we're cutting the position, but I'm telling you in a way that is respectful, I'm being honest with you, and here's what we're going to do to help figure this out. And so even if you don't work for me, I'm still going to be a reference for you. I can be a resource for you. So you still have that sense of connecting with somebody, because with a job, especially for all of us, it's so much a part of our identity. In some ways, the benefits and the income that's a huge hit, but as big as like, well, this is who I am now. I don't have this. Who am I? Well, but I can still belong to these people and I can still connect with each other from a leadership standpoint. I think that becomes even more important.
Right. So I think the message kind of times there is a way of freezing again.
Yeah, there you're back.
I think I froze again. I think even in those difficult times, I think that leaders can still create an environment where people feel safe and treated like human beings. And it's not good enough to say, well, this is life in the big city, and unfortunately, this is you still can do it in a human way and provide a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah, I mean, we're not stupid. We know what's going on, right? I mean, we who are, I mean, most people know, they get it. They see what's happening. They see yeah.
I think the other thing, I was talking to somebody else about this earlier this week. We talked about transparency, and I think it's important to sort of understand that transparency isn't trust, right? And sometimes it's okay, it's justified that not all is transparent. You talked about
Totally.
Crystal, and certainly he had information that he probably couldn't share. Right. And I think trust really is being okay when the leader can't be transparent, or else it's the leader saying, there's information that we don't know yet. And there's information that I just can't share because we're still trying to figure it out. I don't want you to jump to conclusions. And that's an important aspect of psychological safety too, is just helping to other people to understand that you are a human being as well, right? And that provides that environment of trust and psychological safety.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about disclosing everything, but saying, look, there's just some things I can't talk about, but I'm going to tell you what I can tell you. Because I mean, one way to look at this is leaders themselves they are in their own environment that is probably not psychologically safe, right?
Right.
So then you hold on to information because you don't want to share it because you're not sure, and you need to perform. So it kind of moves up and down, right? So from the standpoint of somebody who has a leader, from our standpoint, or the people who work with you or for you, empathy can flow both ways, right? And appreciate, well, let me look at the situation that they're in. Not to excuse, let me be clear. There's a whole other category here that we could touch on, we haven't, where it becomes toxic or abusive or harassing. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not talking about excusing just flat out risky bad behavior. Okay, that isn't a clear aspect of this, that there are also things to do there, right? So I want to make it clear. I'm talking about a context where there is room for benefit of the doubt both ways, right? And appreciating that, right? So I'm not saying it's okay if somebody's a jerk to you because they're under stress. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But if they're not telling you everything, but they're telling you what they can tell you. And the other thing about trust is, there's kind of three things that, if you want to kind of put some language around it, that help make you trustworthy. One is just people's view of what kind of person you are. Are you basically a good person? Do they know that? Do they have that sense? Are you just kind of a good guy, right? He says as a guy, right? Secondly, do I have a sense that you kind of know what you're doing, or you have some competence, you know something here, you have some expertise that you bring to the table? And again, these are things that are both spoken, but more than likely demonstrated. And then the last thing, and probably the most important thing, is, do I feel like you care? Do I feel like you care about what we're doing? Do I feel like you care about me? Do I feel like you care about the people around me? So if you're communicating those things regularly as a leader, and again, all of these are things that you train, you can develop for where it doesn't come naturally. If you're doing that over time, then when you hit a situation like this, then you have that to rely on, right? If you're doing those things and self-consciously. Some people just do it naturally. Some people we can say, hey, look, let's just remind you of doing this. So again, we're bracketing the bad situations and talking more about where I think hopefully most of us are. But it's no less, I'm also not saying, hey, just deal with it, it's just business.
Right.
No.
Right.
No.
So the one more question before we go into our close. For people who are not in formal positions of leadership, one of the things that we try and promote is that leadership doesn't require that you have people reporting directly to you. Leadership exists in other ways, and how you can help other people. And so if people are not in formal positions of leadership, what can they do to promote a psychologically safe environment? And maybe if the people who are in positions of formal authority are working against that psychologically safe environment.
Well, so psychological safety ultimately is it is a cultural phenomenon, which it goes to the culture of the group, of the office, of the working, the people that are regularly interacting with each other. All right. So in a sense, we all have responsibility to it and for it. So that is not to say that if somebody's abusing it and they are in the formal leadership position, we're not excusing it, right? But we all, well, for one thing, we can take care of each other, right? So the things that we need and that we expect, are we granting that to all of our fellow folks, right? The people that we're working with. Am I making it safe for, like for you, Emil, if we're working together, am I making it safe for you in terms of how my comments are? Because one of the things that will happen, right, is that a leader will set a tone, and the way they, for example, will run a meeting, then you'll see other meetings run that way, because we learn, right?
And not taking the bait.
Right. So part is like, well, if you don't like how it's done, then do your own things and begin to change that, right?
Gotcha.
Because if you take the idea that, say, a leader is themselves psychologically feeling vulnerable because they're in charge, they're perfectionists, they got to make this go, they got to get right. I mean, all of those pressures, again, understanding is not excusing, but it helps.
Yeah.
Then you can say, okay, so how might we want to, in a sense, demonstrate this by how we're doing? And I've literally seen where groups can kind of shift it, because they can create a space for the leader to be, oh, okay, wait, they're stepping up, they're bringing stuff up. I can kind of calm down. I can kind of sit back. It's not all on me. I can let myself off the hook a little bit. So
they feel safe.
Let you off the hook a little bit, right? So that kind of so that's what I mean by kind of stepping up. And one of the things I didn't say in my leadership view, but I very much believe that you lead from where you are, right? I don't care what the hierarchy is, you can step up. And in tough situations, then sometimes it's about being willing to step up and say something, which means the institution has to create channels and ways for you to do that, and to be safe in a more fundamental way, right? But it's treat everybody around you the way you want to be treated, to be psychologically safe, and be overt about it, right? I think you can pull people together and say, look, we need to change this. Let's make a plan. Let's start doing this. Maybe we go to the leader and we say, you know what, we think this would be more productive. What if we started doing it this way? What do you think? And they might actually be relieved. They might totally reject you and say, get out of my office. I mean, we don't know, but I think that's in other words, the bad behavior, to call it that, or unfortunate behavior, can't become an excuse for us doing that to each other, I think, is another way to put
Yeah,
that.
that makes sense.
And
Okay,
again,
let's close it up.
okay.
So what are you currently reading?
Well, speaking of leadership, and I'm reading Eric Larson's book, The Splendid and the Vile. It's about Churchill. It's awesome.
Yeah, good.
Quite apropos. I'm reading a book called Gun Island. Amitav Ghosh is an Indian writer. It's about climate change. And I don't know how to describe it, but he's a novelist who wrote a book on climate change, a nonfiction book. And then now this is his first novel where he's kind of dealing with this. It's very a lot of interesting myths and folk tales. It's quite a good read. And then, I mean, I'm a rhetoric guy, so I'm reading a book called The Myth Gap, which deals with kind of the broad myths that we either have or that we don't have that are guiding, especially in our political and our polity. And
that sounds timely.
Good. Yeah,
good.
Yeah, for sure.
What was the hardest thing that you have had to do as a leader?
Probably end something that just needed to end. You know, a project. I can think of a couple of projects, or move on from things that were going fine, but it's like it's time to.
What do you mean, like pull out of a project, something that was failing,
or realize that something's not working, and you know, I'm not going to keep beating my head against this. It's not going to work. It's time to let it go, right? Because like all of us, I'm an achiever. I want to make stuff happen. So you can be blinded by that, and then when you're about figuring things out all the time, sometimes like, you know, look, this isn't going to go. It's not going to work. It's time. That can be really, really difficult. Yeah.
Last question. Give us 2 key pieces of leadership advice.
Well, I got this from a guy who does conflict transformation, but I think it's really, really powerful. And he said, you know, sometimes your most powerful tool is just your presence, right? You know, and another person I've done a lot of work with, you know, she will say, and I think this is so true, just the power of a calm presence, right? Especially in turmoil, right? Just being able, you know, take a deep breath and just like, okay, we're okay. Somebody you can honestly say, doesn't mean we got to figure it out, but just like, right? But you got to be able to do that for yourself. I think that's one piece. And then I think the other is, well, I'm going to give you 3. The second is, first, you know, as leaders, we want to make stuff happen. So the inclination is it's about execution and performance. Yes. But very often the first best thing to do is just be quiet for a while and just listen, right? Just kind of let them tell you, right? And then the three kind of words that guide, and this won't surprise you, curiosity, right? So when I start to get up, flip it into a question, what's going on here? Compassion is huge. Compassion for oneself, compassion for the situation, compassion for people. And then from that is just like courage, right? I mean, just keep taking steps. And that so applies right now.
To psychological safety. And now.
Yeah.
Those are good words of wisdom. Tommy, thank you so much. It's always such fun to talk to you. And again, just for everybody, if you've been entering comments or questions in the feed, Tommy will hopefully be able to respond to some of those. But Tommy and I are also talking about maybe continuing this conversation in some other format. Psychological safety is much bigger than a 30-minute interview. So if you have other suggestions or ways that you'd like to hear about this subject, please leave them in the comments, and we'll be very happy to hear from you. Once again, Tommy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Emil, for the invitation. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.